After studying this module, you shall be able to know the basic idea of what a qualitative research is, learn the processes that qualitative research entails, evaluate the importance of qualitative research in psychology and the issues concerning it, differentiate between qualitative and quantitative processes of psychological research. Introduction to qualitative research and comparison between qualitative and quantitative research methods. There are two main parts in this module. Part 1, Introduction to Qualitative Research. This section outlines the process of qualitative research in psychology, beginning with its historical origins and the basic tenets of the qualitative paradigm. It goes on to discuss the process of carrying out research, including sampling, methods of data collection and data analysis. Lastly, it contemplates the major issues concerning qualitative studies in psychology. Part 2, which is the comparison between qualitative and quantitative research. Here we analyze as to how the two paradigms differ and through the comparative study understand the pros and cons of both. So let's start with Part 1, Introduction to Qualitative Research. The historical beginnings of qualitative research and the paradigm shift from quantitative to qualitative. Research in the discipline of psychology began with the quantitative paradigm, particularly with experimentation. During the 1880s and the 1890s period, Sigmund Freud was an important figure, and this method of study primarily entailed detailed case histories, narratives and the sort, basically qualitative research. Freud and Piaget were then exceptions who did not conform to the experimental paradigm of their times. By 1960s, the paradigm crisis had begun. There was growing evidence of awareness within the psychological community that experiments were inadequate for the purposes of developing a proper understanding of humans. By the 1990s, it was clear that a new paradigm had begun to emerge. A report of the British Psychological Society acknowledged that future developments within psychology would be assisted by the increased use of qualitative approaches in teaching and in research. Although the paradigm shift had not begun at that time, the origins of qualitative research methods can be traced back as early as the 1890s, when Booth and Webb used a combination of several methods like observation, interview as well as surveys to study the life and labor of the London poor. Then, apart from Freud and Piaget, who stuck to qualitative methods in the strictly experimental regime, there were people like Disher, a market researcher and a great advocate of the interview technique. Similarly, the use of field research, an important method of qualitative research, saw a growth, particularly due to the tremendous importance given to it by the Chicago School of Sociology. The technique went through revolutionary developmental stages throughout 1910 to 1960s, and by the 1960s, the observation method was given great emphasis as a social research method. The 1990s also saw the emergence of new forms of qualitative data analysis like content and the integrated phenomenological approach, which greatly pushed the qualitative paradigm further. It also saw the development of the focus group technique, and from there on, there was an explosion of interest in qualitative methods. The shift in paradigm is significant and is reflected in increasing number of qualitative research articles appearing in journals, dissertations with qualitative projects, and the establishment of psychology courses teaching qualitative methodologies. The latest trend in research, however, is shifting to a combination of quantitative and qualitative approaches that has come with a better understanding about the pros and the cons of both the orientations. Familiarizing with qualitative research. Smith in 2003 defines qualitative psychology as concerned with the describing of the constituent properties of an entity, while quantitative analysis is involved in determining how much of the entity there is. It aims to provide rich descriptive accounts of the phenomenon under investigation, while quantitative research is more generally concerned with counting occurrences, volumes or the sizes of association between entities. Qualitative approach is engaged with exploring, describing and interpreting the personal and social experiences of participants. And researchers attempt to understand a small number of participants' own frame of reference rather than trying to test a preconceived hypothesis on a large sample. The logic of research is not so much to test out given theories about what guides human behavior, but instead to develop an appreciation of the underlying motivations that people have for doing what they do. Underlying the qualitative research style, then, is the assumption that in order to understand human behavior, a researcher must first understand the meanings that people have of the world around them, because these meanings tend to govern their actions. The emphasis given by qualitative researchers to their studies, therefore, involves an examination of the perspective of the people or groups that are of interest to them, their ideas, attitudes, motives, and intentions. As Hen et al. Aptly point out, these are certain characteristics of qualitative research methods. First, research is carried out in real life settings in order to build up an understanding of how people experience the world around them and to identify what informs their behavior. The researcher attempts to study action and talks as it naturally occurs, with as little disruption to people's life as is possible. Second, the objective is to take detailed descriptions of people's behavior and thoughts to illuminate their social beginnings. This implies adopting an insider perspective in research in which there is likely to be closeness between the researcher and the people studied, rather than an impersonal and distant relationship. Third, the researcher is likely to adopt an approach in which there is no precise initial specification of research issues and concepts. The focus of the research may change during the course of collecting data as ideas develop and particular issues become important. The qualitative approach involves theory construction rather than theory testing. Theoretical ideas develop from initial data collection and then go on to influence future data collection. There is cumulative spiral of theory development and data collection. There is an inductive approach. Qualitative researchers tend to begin with no more than a rather general interest in some type of social phenomena or issue. It is only during the course of data collection and analysis that researchers narrow down their research problem and begin to formulate and test hypotheses. The research studies one or a small number of cases, often over a lengthy period of time. In this context, the data collection process is characterized as being intensive, very detailed. Study involves the collection of large quantities of data from small number of informants and settings. A range of types of data is employed, not just one. Results from observations or unstructured interviews are usually the main sources of data, which use may be made of many public and private documents and even of official statistics and questionnaire data. There is minimal pre-structuring of the data that is collected. It is for this reason that the observations and interviews used by qualitative researchers are often referred to as unstructured. The reporting of qualitative research data, generally in the form of verbal descriptions and explanations with quantification and statistical analysis, is taking a subordinate role at most. Sampling in qualitative research. Comparatively, there is less focus on samples representativeness when it comes to qualitative research. The focus is rather on representativeness of concepts in the research and of being able to access the social processes in which the researcher is interested. That is, importance is given to how the sample or small collection of cases, units, or activities illuminates social life. The primary purpose of sampling here is to collect specific cases, events, or actions that can clarify and deepen understanding. Qualitative researchers' concern is to find cases that will enhance what the researchers learn about the processes of social life in a specific context. Typically, theoretical sampling or snowball sampling is used. Snowball sampling is used where there is no obvious list to refer to in order to generate a participant base for a study. It relies on the researcher obtaining a strategically important contact who can recommend other possible participants who might be approached to take part in the study. Theoretical sampling is entirely governed by the selection of those respondents who will maximize theoretical development. The sampling should aim to locate strategic data which may refute emerging hypotheses. Sampling stops when theoretical saturation is reached, that is, when no new analytical insights are forthcoming from a given situation. Data collection, methods of qualitative research. The most established methods of qualitative data collection include interviews. They are in-depth one-to-one interactions where the interviewees talk about the subject in terms of their own frames of reference, that is, they are open-ended. Observations or ethnography. In-depth observations of people, behaviors, institutions, cultures and customs, etc. Researchers take detailed field notes. Case studies. Here, the researcher examines in depth many features, including psychological characteristics of a few cases over time. Cases should be individual, groups, organizations, etc., and data is collected through observations, interviews, or a combination of both. Focus group discussions. Here, a group of participants are brought together to share and discuss their views on a topic. These are used when a researcher wants to assess how several people work out a common view or the range of views about a particular topic. The intention is to stimulate discussion among people and bring to the surface responses that otherwise may lay dormant. Data analysis in qualitative research. In contrast to quantitative research, the data collection in qualitative methods involve naturalistic, textual, or verbal reports. Hence, data analysis involves interpretation of what these textual data means or implies. There are several methods of qualitative data analysis like thematic or content analysis, grounded theory analysis, discourse analysis, conversation analysis, interpretive phenomenological analysis, and narrative analysis. The interpretation is conveyed to the scientific community through detailed narrative reports of the participants' perceptions, insights of the researcher, and understanding about the phenomena. Visual presentations of data may be possible like through maps, diagrams, or photographs. Issues in qualitative research. Validity. The validity of qualitative researches has always been a question, whether the results accurately reflect the phenomena under study or not. Reliability. The qualitative research is criticized both for lacking structure and system and for an inability of researchers using this approach to generalize beyond a small number of cases. The replicability of studies is also poor. Generalizability. Implications from a study of few cases can never be generalized to human behavior per se, but many researchers feel that since the goal of qualitative research is to describe a specific group in detail and to explain the patterns that exist, the question of generalizability itself should not be raised. The issue of reactivity. People may consciously or unconsciously alter the way they behave or modify what they say if they are aware that they are being researched. This will most likely be the case if the researcher is studying a sensitive area. The subjectivity of the researcher. Ultimately, it is in the hands of the researcher what to make of the data collected. It depends upon the researcher what parts of the data should be considered significant, what is to be filtered out, and what implications to be derived out of the compiled data over the identification with the subjects. This is especially applicable to the observation method, wherein if the researcher over a long period of close association with the subjects begins to identify with them, then he or she may become biased and may not be able to analyze objectively. Access to target subjects. Often researchers face constraints in reaching out to the subjects of their interest. For example, studying juvenile delinquents. They may often face a lot of political and legal barriers. Ethical issues. Researchers may have to resort to deception and often not overtly state their objectives of research since it would compromise their study, and this betrayal of confidences poses ethical considerations. Part 2. Comparison between qualitative and quantitative research methods. Qualitative versus quantitative, a Cold War. Some claims worth considering. Qualitative methods provide a more complete understanding of the subject matter of the research. Some qualitative researchers argue that quantification fails to come to terms with or misses crucial aspects of what is being studied. Quantification encourages premature abstraction from the subject matter of research, and a concentration on numbers and statistics rather than the concepts. Human experience and interaction are far too complex to be reduced to a few variables as is typical in quantitative research. Qualitative methods are a preliminary stage in the research process which contributes to the eventual development of adequate quantification. Quantification is, in this formulation, the ultimate goal of research. Only the quantitative data lead to results in the actual sense of the word, whereas the qualitative data play a more illustrative part. Qualitative methods can live very well without the later use of quantitative methods, whereas quantitative methods need qualitative methods for explaining the relations they find. Now, the conventional rigid dichotomy of quantitative-qualitative methodologies is inadequate to differentiate different types of researches. The dichotomy implies that research inevitably falls into one or other of these apparently neat boxes. This is not necessarily the case. Between these extremes of quantification and qualitative data gathering are many intermediary possibilities. A summarized table of differences between quantitative and qualitative orientations to research. Quantitative, reliability is the key. Qualitative, authenticity is the key. Quantitative, it is value free, it is not based on any moral principles. Qualitative, values are present and explicit. The researcher's subjective principles have a bearing on the research. Qualitative, theory and data are separate. There is a distinction between the two, and theory is stated before data is begun to be collected. On the other hand, the theory and data are fused. There is a fine line between the two, and the theory evolves along with the process of data collection. Quantitative, it is independent of context. The context of the society, events, or history have no bearing. Qualitative, it is situationally constrained. The context is critical. Quantitative, there are many cases or subjects. Research is done on a large scale and the method is equipped to deal with large numbers. Qualitative, there are few individual cases done at a time and the data collected is in detail and very exhaustive. Quantitative, statistical analysis is done on the data and it uses tests like T and F and correlational analysis. Qualitative, a qualitative method of analysis includes thematic, discourse, grounded theory, narrative, etc. and the main feature is the culling out of the main emerging themes. Quantitative, the researcher is detached. Often data collection is carried out by assistants who can be easily briefed about it. Qualitative, the research is actively involved in the data collection and interacts fully with the participants. Quantitative, the major steps involved are selection of topic, focusing of the question which involves formulation of hypothesis and operative defining variables, then making the research design, data collection, analysis and interpretation. In the qualitative, the major steps are acknowledging the self, adopting a perspective, study design formation, data collection, analysis, interpretation and then reporting. There is no formulation of hypothesis. The quantitative, the research question is pre-planned. In the qualitative, the research question is emergent. In quantitative, the hypotheses are enumerated and stated along with the formulation of the research question. In qualitative, no hypothesis is stated. The researcher has no idea as to how the data will emerge. In quantitative, the concepts are in terms of variables and are concrete. In qualitative, the concepts are in terms of motifs, themes, generalizations, etc. In quantitative, the data is hard and in the form of numbers which can be made into computer readable formats. Summary. The qualitative paradigm of psychological research developed gradually after the quantitative methods were established. The paradigm shift was fueled by the growing awareness that experiments were inadequate to capture the essence of psychological study. Although less structured compared to the quantitative methods, the qualitative research has its own basic tenets and is a scientific procedure with proper methodology at every step involved in the process. Evaluating the process of qualitative research, there are several issues that need to be considered, but the pros of the method make it indispensable to psychological research. The two paradigms differ greatly in their approach to research, but research in the field would be at a loss if either of them were to be excluded. The best approach is perhaps to use the two to complement each other and to develop a quali-quanti mixed researches.